And the last part of the discussion is to discuss this idea, not of the interaction between myself and others, right? So it's not simply the case that we're talking about my interaction or my symbolic interaction between myself and some object, right? It is not just the interaction between myself and another human being, right? It also isn't just the interaction between myself and some group of human beings. The groups that we discuss, the first being the primary group, the primary group where you get value, the second group being the reference group. So it's not just the interaction between these three, right? We can have symbolic interaction between objects. We talked about the stop sign. Symbolic interaction between individuals. Symbolic interaction between groups. The label is groups. The last thing, and arguably the most complicated thing, is the interaction that is introspective, the interaction with myself, right? I can have a symbolic interaction with myself, right? So that we, I don't want to minimize this and make this too general, right? But I think it's good. It's a good pedagogical device so that you can see it visually. Is that we essentially in symbolic interactionism have 4 different senses in which we interact with things and other human beings in the world. It's not necessarily clearly stated anywhere in the literature as such, but if you look at all of the different interactions that are described and discussed in both the Chicago School or the Iowa School, we have interactions with objects, interactions with individuals, interactions with groups, and then the last interaction is this introspective interaction with myself. The question is, what is this introspective interaction? Well, the first thing to recognize is a technical term that arrives out of this introspection, and it's not to say that this only arises in a discussion of introspection with respect to symbolic interactionism, but it definitely arises in introspection. It can arise in many different forms, and this is known as self-concept. Right? The idea of the self-concept. And the question is, well, what is the self-concept? What does self-concept mean? Well, the self-concept is the concept that I have of myself based on sort of a history, right? A historical narrative of my interaction. So if you think of a timeline, and you say birth, and you say present, right? What I do is I reflect on various times in my life on the social interactions that I've had, right? I remember the time in class where the teacher said I was a good writer. I remember getting an A on the assignment. I remember graduating with honors. I remember having an article written about me, and da-da-da-da-da, and now I can see that's why I am, my self-concept is, I am Jason Campbell, the instructor, right? That self-concept is not something that just happens instantaneously, right? This idea of self-concept isn't something that's manufactured overnight. The idea of self-concept is a consequence of this historical narrative, right? Specifically this historical self-narrative, right? This historical self-narrative wherein I look back at moments in my life, and it is the collection of these narratives that is going to identify and help me determine who it is that I actually am. Obviously, as we said before early in the discussion, that I'm at all times comparing my sense of self against others' interpretation of myself. And the example that I gave was being handy, right? If I think that I'm a handyman and I go out into the world and other people say that I'm a handyman, well, I've verified, I've validated my self-concept of being handy. If my self-concept is that I'm a good educator, well, that is only valid insofar as other people say, hey, you're a pretty good educator, right? I can believe I'm a great educator all I want, but if I'm not educating anybody, I'm not failing at my job. You can be a great artist all you want in the privacy of your own home, but until you take that medium into the world and have some validation, some verification, there really isn't a means of validating the self-concept, right? So that this self-concept is sort of a holistic approach, right? So if we were to bracket all of this, the self-concept is a holistic approach. It's a consequence of this historical self-narrative, which is itself a consequence of my interaction, my symbolic interaction with many different things, right? With individuals, with objects, with groups, with myself. This idea, and then just one last point, this idea of symbolic interactionism and the idea that individuals communicate and have an understanding of self and appreciation of others within sociological narrative, it's important to recognize that this meaning, and I don't know if I have meaning here, this meaning, right? This meaning is always constructed. Right? I won't go so far as to say, to conflate symbolic interactionism with social construct theory, right? Or social constructionism. But there is a lot of overlap, right? There's significant overlap. There's significant differences. There's significant variations as well. But in a sense, the one thing that is definitely shared between social constructionism and symbolic interactionism is that meaning is constructed, right? Meaning is never going to be fixed. There's never going to be a sense in which we can talk about something having a particular meaning, and that meaning is inherent and flexible and capable of being changed. That is not what the symbolic interactionist is going to say. The symbolic interactionist is going to say in that in my attempt to find meaning in the world, both of the world and of myself, I, the individual, subjectively interact with the symbols that are sort of in the world, right? I interact with these symbols, and I come to understand the meaning of these symbols so that I can navigate through the world. On another level, on a higher level, some of us can actually create symbols, right? Create icons and ascribe meaning to those forms and give those forms an elevated status of a symbol, and then disseminate the meaning of the symbol to the masses, quote unquote. And that's a different function, right? But no matter what end of the spectrum that you are, whether you are merely and we all are, merely interacting with symbols in our daily lives, stop signs and lots of different things, right? But we are also in a process of constructing meaning, right? We are all in a process of constructing meaning, so that ultimately we realize sort of at the heart of symbolic interactionism is that meaning is always changing, right? Meaning is always changing, right? So that meaning for the symbolic interactionist is always changing. It's always in flux. It's always open. Meaning is always open to interpretation, right? Because as we said, the shared meaning, and the ascription of that meaning to a particular form to create a symbol. If we have dissent within the group, if individuals within the group start to say that I don't like the way that symbol is being portrayed, I don't like the meaning that symbol has, what will end up happening is that the meaning will change, right? And we see this time and time again, right? Symbols only retain the meanings that they have if we agree socially, right? As a group, as a collective, that they retain those meanings. Once there's dissent, right? And once individuals start to say, no, I think it should mean this, or I don't think it means what it used to mean, what we need to do at that point is reconstruct or recreate the narrative of meaning for that particular symbol, right? So that this meaning is always going to be in flux, this meaning is always going to be negotiated, and this meaning is always going to govern how we in society interact and interpret these interactions with others, right? So that symbolic interactionism, on that sense, really is a micro level analysis. It talks about the individual, the I, me, and my interaction with you and with others and with objects and with myself. And hopefully now you have a clear understanding of symbolic interactionism. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to watch my videos. Hopefully you'll tune in next time, and thanks a lot. So I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Have a good day.